I call that the Disney effect, the Walt Disney effect. Because,
Nice.
as kids, we used to watch these movies, and you always had the good guy and the bad guy. And if there was a fight, then we naturally sided with the good against the evil. But you have to understand that in real life, it doesn't work this way. Sometimes you have two evil parties fighting against each other. So if you think of the federal government here in the US as being tyrannical, and suppose that you really detest things that they do and the way they erode personal liberties, that doesn't mean that their adversaries are any better. You can have two thugs fighting between them and no outcome. No matter who
Absolutely.
wins, humanity is going to lose. So we want liberty to win. Okay? We want us to win, the people. Okay? So I think this is what stackers should be focused on and not root for any side in this conflict.
Hello and welcome. Tonight, I'm joined by Oren Elbaz, the Silver Hermit. He is a sound money advocate and a market analyst. Gigi Bullion will be joining our conversation tonight as well. He hand pours 3/9 fine silver and is a YouTube content creator. Find their links in the description below. Gentlemen, welcome. It's great to speak with both of you tonight.
Hello, hello, good evening.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. It's a pleasure to have both of you here. Tonight, we are going to discuss the approaching BRICS meeting scheduled for October 22nd through the 24th of this year. It is expected that this economic bloc will be announcing the launch of an alternative cross-border payment settlement called the unit that is supposed to be 40% pegged to gold and the other 60% to a basket of currencies from participating countries. What do you guys think this could mean for the dollar and for gold or silver in the future?
Well, the BRICS issue and the unit currency which they are discussing, it's a very, very big topic. As we've all heard, there's been extreme sanctions on Russia by the US since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Russian foreign exchange reserves have been frozen. Lately, they've been talking about seizing them altogether, using them in order to fund the Ukrainian government, which is considered to be quite extreme and unprecedented. And obviously, Russia and other BRICS nations are looking for other ways to conduct international trade. Now that Russia is cut off from the SWIFT system, they have to find an alternative. And in the past couple of years, they've been struggling to do so. They need to create an alternative infrastructure so that they can circumvent the SWIFT system and not be so dependent on the dollar and on the Western economic system. So one of the projects which was discussed was the unit, which is supposedly a trade currency based on a blockchain backed by gold. But what is interesting is that there is a recent article on the TASS news agency mentioning this project, discussing about presenting this project in the next BRICS summit, which will take place in October in Russia, in the city of Kazan. And since this news agency, since they're state-owned, this kind of gives us the feeling that it's real, that it's really happening. Now, they're discussing an entire infrastructure, an entire financial infrastructure that will come with it. The unit, it's going to be the currency, the trade currency, but they're also talking about establishing a platform for international settlement. They're going to call it the bridge. They're talking about a payment system, which is going to called pay for, it's going to be for the end users. Yeah,
Sure.
very straightforward names. Yeah. A settlement depository, it's going to be called clear. An insurance mechanism, naturally called insurance, and also a credit rating agency. they're discussing creating all of these mechanisms. So the moment they're discussing about creating an entire economic infrastructure, that tells me that they're talking business. They're serious about it. At least the people who are leading this task force, they know what they're talking about and they're serious about it. Now, whether they're going to be able to, politically make it happen and overcome objections within the leadership of the BRICS nations, that's another question.
Well, I really appreciate your insights on that. And I think your conclusion is probably correct, that they are serious about this and they're going to try and get it going as quickly as possible. I think that countries outside of Russia are already fearful of getting the Russian treatment as far as having the dollar weaponized against them. And you had brought up Russia, and Russia has been on a buying spree. As of September, Russia's gold holdings had reached almost 189 billion, and its share in Russia's international reserves is now over 30% for the first time in almost a quarter of a century. So right now they are a little over 75% of the way to that 40% threshold, if that turns out to be what they're all gunning for. And this is something that's not foreign to them as a country. If you go back to 1993, gold was about 56.9% of their reserves. But
Wow.
because of the sanctions on them, like you had brought up, they really can't do anything with US dollars. And their movement away from the dollar is crucial. A few days ago, Russia has announced that they are going to be buying $92 million worth of gold per day. This amount of money will fetch them about 1,100 kilos of gold per day. What do you guys think about Russia's buying spree? And do you think that they are trying to achieve that 40% goal?
As far as Russia, is cut out of, SWIFT, uh, that's kind of the obvious thing to go to is precious metals, like specifically gold. And, if I were the Russian government or a Russian central bank, all of these different things, if I need to buy, artillery shells because they're waging a war in Ukraine right now, if I need to buy that, if I need to buy anything, if I'm cut out of, SWIFT, if I'm having even issues with my natural resources, selling that for fiat being sabotaged, gold is really classic. It's been money. We all know it's stable. So that seems pretty the obvious go-to at that point. And I think they're gonna keep stacking, for lack of better terms, as much gold as possible. And Russia is a relatively large producer. I think in 2023 they produced 310 metric tons, according to, I think, Reuters. I got that information. I have some notes here, but yeah, it seems to be what I would do if I were them. So I think that trend is going to continue.
So there's a trade-off here. Naturally, adopting gold is a good way of introducing a new trade currency, which automatically receives legitimacy and trust from other partners due to the fact that it is backed by a commodity which is valuable and has thousands of years of monetary use behind it. But on the other hand, the moment they introduce a gold-backed currency, in a way, they are tying their own hands. What do I mean? Because for a government, the ability to issue a fiat currency and print it, that's a great way for them to extract purchasing power from their population. And governments usually don't want to give up that power. They don't want to relinquish that power. So, from what I hear, the country which is most opposed to that idea is India. Because on one hand, the Indian people, they love gold, and recently they also love silver. And they use gold in order to save because the Indian rupee is constantly being devalued because they're constantly printing more and more of it. So there's huge inflation there. And as I understand it, The Indian government doesn't want to give up that power to constantly create inflation. And they want consensus among the BRICS nations. They move all or they don't move at all. So this is why they're taking their time. They have been discussing this idea for a long time. They have to quit the dollar because so long as they are on the dollar system, on the dollar standard, they can't really fight the United States. The moment they go to war, the United States can cut them off swift, can sabotage their ability to conduct international trade. So they're in this conundrum. On one hand, they have to ditch the dollar. On the other hand, they're afraid to do that. They don't want to relinquish that power. And this is why they're like dragging their feet. And that's the reason I think that they haven't done this already.
That makes sense because they are in a really nice position right now. And it is extremely risky to get into any sort of serious confrontations with a country that you have such close economic ties with. So that's very insightful.
I want to give you
Easy.
another point to think about.
Okay.
And that's the fact that if they roll out something, it needs to work. They can't have technical issues. They can't have, because they're trying to garner trust. They want to gain market share of international trade. Now, if they issue a currency and it has technical difficulties or glitches in the system, or it has security issues, and some hackers manage to hack it and damage certain corporations, then it's going to fail. Nobody's going to use it, and then it's going
That
to
would be it.
be dead on arrival. So I think that's another factor we need to take into consideration, that they want to make sure that what they have is fully functional before they actually officially launch it. Because if it's a failed launch, it's going to be a huge, huge embarrassment for them.
Yeah, and a huge propaganda win for their opponents as well.
And
Yeah,
a
yeah,
huge propaganda win for the dollar.
Yeah,
that would be
precisely,
a total
precisely.
mess for them. Absolutely. And it is interesting too, because you see some countries getting attracted in that you might not have expected, like Turkey recently. A NATO ally with a powerful military, clearly showing interest in joining the BRICS, and attracting nations like that would definitely be difficult if they had a failed launch. If it went like one of my live streams where there was technical problems right at the beginning, a lot of people would probably want to jump ship because they're not as nice as you gentlemen.
Thank you.
Another interesting thing that's going on with the BRICS is the activity at the Shanghai Exchange. The price of silver there has been higher than the US for some time now, and the trading volumes in Shanghai have been high, even though the price is higher. What do you guys make of that?
The price on the Shanghai exchange being different
Yes.
than on the COMEX.
Yeah, it's a little higher out there.
Yeah,
There's been a bit of an arbitrage lately.
I don't know. I'm not an insider at any of these institutions, but I would say institutions outside of US or outside of US control or outside the West really probably still aren't accurate, but reflect a more accurate version of what the real price would be on the market, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that should be a truer picture of what the silver price is when compared to the manipulated prices we have out here at the commodities exchange.
Mhm.
I think we need to explain something about what's happening in the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Well, unlike the COMEX, for instance, which deals only with futures contracts, in the Shanghai Gold Exchange, there is also a separate contract, which is a physical contract. So they have futures like the COMEX, and then there are the physical contracts where no margin trading is allowed and no cash settlement is allowed. So you're forced to at the end of the contract, deliver physical metal. To the best of my understanding, this means that specifically in that contract, you have true price discovery, because this is, real consumers trading with real producers. Because, speculators have no business dealing with these physical contracts. So the way I understand it is that what the Shanghai Gold Exchange has given us is true price discovery for the first time in decades in the precious metals market. And this is why you're seeing a higher price. You're seeing a premium compared to the price in the West, in the LBMA, etc. And this arbitrage, as it grows and as it persists, well, it's drawing metal from the West to the East, because, of course, metal wants to go where it gets the best price. And we can expect this process to continue until, the West is drained out of its physical metal. And all the shenanigans in the comics are finally revealed. So the way I see it, it's just, economics doing its thing in order to shift the pricing power from the West, which is playing pretend, to the East, which is, dealing with real metal. And eventually we're going to see the price being determined there in China.
I think you're absolutely correct. And it's been such for us stackers, it's been such a nice thing that they have started driving the price up a bit with the physical silver. Over here it's about 400 to 1 as far as the amount of paper contracts they're writing per ounce of silver. And that has just really kept a lid on the price for a long time. So hopefully they will assist us in our path to true price discovery. I think it's also something that shows they have a lot of foresight. One thing that's driving a lot of demand in China is the massive solar projects that they're engaging in. China's demand for silver in the solar industry is expected to increase by almost 170% by 2030. China's Green Development Group, they recently finished the world's largest solar plant. And so that it's online now. It's, 3.5 gigawatts, I believe. And they have more of these projects slated, and it's smart of them to be stacking up silver right now because they're kind of able to take advantage of the price suppression. And so, they're looking at the future, they're getting it all lined up. And it wouldn't surprise me if some of these projects that they're looking at, they already have the silver, partially allocated for some of these that are going to be coming up. Another thing that's interesting is China is the world's largest gold producer. And their recent buying spree has come to a pause. And so what I'm wondering is if it's possible that they might have quietly achieved a goal that Russia, for example, might be kind of feverishly chasing after right now. What do you guys think might have caused their recent pause in gold buying?
So I believe, at least in 2023, I believe China produced 370 metric tons of gold. It could be that is like a fake number, and they actually have produced a lot more than that, because especially for those types of governments that don't really care about human rights at all, they can use slave labor and like really get that gold out there.
Yeah.
They could have it in a vault somewhere. So it could be that they have produced actually a lot more gold than they've publicized. Also, another factor in that is, it seems to me that through Belt and Road and a lot of other things that the CCP does, that they basically want to create a lot of vassal states or countries that are in an alliance of convenience. At least China wants to be the next, global hegemon, essentially. Excuse me if I'm rambling a little bit.
I agree completely.
Yeah, it's no sweat. And it's really hard to tell what's going on behind the Iron Curtain over there.
Exactly.
I had read an article a few years back, and it was talking about as far as for their army, they don't have to record use for their army for as far as silver and gold consumption. And there's speculation that some of the silver that's getting allocated to their army is getting taken directly from their mines. And you guys might have seen recently the estimates that they're now the world's second silver producer behind Mexico. So now they're in spot number 2 for silver and spot number 1 for gold.
Mhm.
I would say about China, first of all, I agree completely. You can't trust any data which is coming out of there. Now, I think that China is treating both gold and silver as strategic metal. Gold due to its monetary properties, silver due to its industrial properties. The thing is, I think they are producing it even above and beyond the costs which are normal at the West. And I suspect that they're mining deposits, even if they have very low grade, just to get their hands on the metal. And this is how they position themselves as, top tier producers of the metal in the world, because the price doesn't have to be competitive. Now, nothing really comes out of China in terms of gold and silver. They're keeping it. Either it goes to their local industries or it's going to some vault somewhere. And you're never going to get true data, true numbers, because they have multiple channels. For instance, I've heard that they have a sovereign wealth fund. And that sovereign wealth fund is buying gold just as much as the PBOC may buy gold. So sometimes they report that the PBOC is not buying gold. Maybe it means that it's now going to the National Wealth Fund or some other fund which you never heard of. They never told you about. So really,
Right.
you really shouldn't get too excited about this kind of data. I think it's more a market manipulation than anything else. Maybe they tell you that because they want the price to fall a bit so they can continue buying. On top of accumulating their local production, they're also buying from abroad. So they're buying hand over fist. That should be your base assumption. I wanted to say
Absolutely.
something. It's an important message that I have to all the stacking community. Look, we sometimes think of China or Russia as our allies, quote unquote, because they are the ones who are supposed to deliver true price discovery or liberate gold and silver or fight the dollar, the Federal Reserve note, which we hate so much. But the thing is, China and Russia and their allies, they're not our friends, not really.
Not
Well,
at
they,
all.
they might assist us individually because we're stackers, and the fact that they're fighting the US dollar, maybe it's going to be beneficial to us financially. But if you look at the big picture, they're still the adversaries of the West. Although we are looking at their actions and sometimes supporting their actions, we must remember that they're probably not the friends of liberty, of personal liberty. There's hardly any personal liberty in China. And if China takes over the world, I fear that there's going to be very little personal liberty also here in the West. And one last thing that I want to mention, we in the West, I call that the Disney effect, the Walt Disney effect. Because,
Nice.
as kids, we used to watch these movies, and you always had the good guy and the bad guy. And if there was a fight, then we naturally sided with the good against the evil. But you have to understand that in real life, it doesn't work this way. Sometimes you have two evil parties fighting against each other. So if you think of the federal government here in the US as being tyrannical, and suppose that you really detest things that they do and the way they erode personal liberties, that doesn't mean that their adversaries are any better. You can have two thugs fighting between them and no outcome. No matter who
Absolutely.
wins, humanity is going to lose. So we want liberty to win. Okay? We want us to win, the people. Okay? So I think this is what stackers should be focused on. and not root for any side in this conflict.
Yeah, Oren, I think you really hit the nail on the head, and that message needs to be like said as many times as possible, because if I go on X, formerly Twitter, or some places on Reddit, various places on the internet, it seems like I see stackers and also Westerners of certain political persuasions and people I've met in real life that the whole Federal Reserve System we have in the US, I believe is fraudulent. I'm sure you guys would probably agree. I see so many people that are basically like, oh, well, I hope Russia succeeds and I hope China succeeds to form a new world order. And it seems like they're not thinking like, okay, yeah, they don't like the US. So, I mean, if you look at China, I mean, it's a genocidal, basically fascist regime. Uh, you should not want that to win over. I mean, America isn't great either, or NATO isn't the best thing in the world. There's a lot of fraudulent stuff going on. There's a lot of violations of liberties and whatnot. And like you said, it might benefit some people financially or in other ways in the short term. But in the long term, I mean, if you look at a world that's run by the Chinese Communist Party, that's a dystopian, terrifying future. So I think it's important to be nuanced on these things and not just be my government bad, therefore I want it to collapse by any means necessary. And I do see that sentiment a lot, and it does kind of scare me. And it is very clear that, Russia has invaded Ukraine, previously invaded Georgia, uh, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and now in Ukraine. They're using military action. China, it looks like, they are continually saying, like, we are going to invade Taiwan, the Republic of China. When that will happen, I think it's a matter of when. I would like to have peace, but it seems like these regimes are not, they're expansionists, and they want to have a world that doesn't have a Western hegemony. And it's a nuanced issue, and I think people need to really think critically about that. And that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, definitely powerful thoughts on that, and really appreciate you sharing them. People should be careful not to end up rooting for communist China just because they want to see the price of their stack increase. Um, and I do think it's because of some of the differences in the countries. Like you said, some of these countries are very far apart. It's unusual to see them partnering up, and it seems to be something they're doing mostly for defensive reasons, in a very protective manner, which makes sense. But I could see some of these relationships falling apart pretty easily if things weren't going smoothly. So,
Yes.
so that's a really insightful stuff.
That's an excellent point, because you have some strange bedfellows there at the BRICS organization, and the two most peculiar ones are Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, Iran, I
Yeah.
can kind of understand how they're partnering with Russia and China, but Iran and Saudi Arabia are at odds with each other. They are at war with each other. It's a religious war. It's a matter of Sunnis versus Shiites. It's an Islamic matter. It existed for hundreds of years, and it's not going to be resolved overnight. Even if they do have an economic incentive to cooperate, this conflict between the Sunnis and the Shiites, it's not going to go away. And there's always going to be enmities between the two. And this is why it was so, surprising to hear about Saudi Arabia considering joining the BRICS organizations. But then you need to ask yourselves, because I always see China as the true leader of this organization. Is China powerful enough to make these two sit together nicely without fighting each other?
Mhm.
And it kind of gives you the idea or the insight that the countries who are cooperating within the BRICS nations are not doing so out of friendliness or because they feel close to each other or because they share values, common values. It's not something positive which is bringing them together. They are in this organization because they oppose the West, because they oppose the leadership of the United States. That's a very, very bad cause to rally around, because it means that if they ever manage to beat the United States, even financially, economically, then at the instant that the United States is beaten, then they start fighting each other. Then the BRICS organization falls apart because there's nothing uniting them any longer. And this is perhaps why the West does have a chance of coming out of this conflict as victorious again, because even though we've given up on much of our civil liberties and they've been eroded in the past few years, at least officially the West is united around the ideas of liberty and the pursuit of happiness, as you in the United States say. And we can reform our societies. We can return to these values, to these positive values, even though we can replace our politicians. The values are still there and the people believe in the values. So there's still hope for the West.
Thank you for listening to the Silver Hermit podcast. If you like this content, please donate in the link which appears in the description below. Please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and family. Hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I release a new video. Remember, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This video is intended for general informational purposes only and should not be regarded as investment advice. Before taking any investment decision, please consult with a professional financial advisor who may assess your personal investment objectives and needs.